Ladies and gents, it's Elliot back at Engineers. Thanks for all checking in and coming to listen to another fabulous episode. We've got Jason today, and we're always keen to talk about API aggregators and the rise of them over the last couple of years. And Jason and the team at Codat have done another fascinating piece of work in the world of payments or financial integration. So we're going to dig deeper into the guys and girls at Codat over the next half hour, 45 minutes. Jason, cheers for joining us.
Thanks, man.
Jason, give us a bit of an intro into your background. Let's get a feel for Jason, and let's get a feel for Codat and dig deeper into, I guess, the piece, API integrations, and we can explore your journey a little bit more.
Yeah. So as you said, my name's Jason. I'm the head of engineering at Codat. I stood up at some sort of group meeting, maybe, for my sins. And I've done a few bits and pieces. I started off as an electronics engineer and did bits of firmware, and I've done all sorts of bits of software, and I found myself kind of running the engineering team at Codat. So I've worked in a few different industries, health and finance and automotive and things like that. So all sorts of different places. And now find myself in this world of API aggregation, which is great.
It's a fun old world. What attracted you, do you feel, if you remember those moments, what attracted you to Codat at the time before joining the business? I probably caught you off guard here, and other Codat people are going to listen to this, but what attracted you at the time?
Well, I worked with the three founders at a previous company. We were trying to build in-house really the problem that Codat solves. And I was one of the engineers on that project, and along with those guys who worked in sort of other areas or within engineering that company. And it was hard. It was a faff, right? We looked for incumbents that maybe could solve the problem, and there were a couple, but the tech was old. They'd started early, and the tech was probably very sound when they started, but they hadn't played catch up, and there wasn't much in the competitive landscape. And I think the guys felt, there's a real opportunity here for someone to tackle this problem with a real focus on the experience, the developer's experience, not just the kind of the data that we're getting out. Obviously, that's incredibly important. And so they started up, and I think at the time I wasn't really ready to join a company that early stage, but it was such an exciting project and something I'd worked on and really understood the value. And so I was like, if you can convince someone to give you some money and funding, I'll come and join you that day. So the day they announced family and friends seed round, I was like, okay, fine, I'll quit my job and I'll come join you. So it was the early days of COVID. We were 4 guys and a printer, I think we used to refer to ourselves as.
Okay. Tell us about the problem that you're trying to solve. I'm also interested to understand what you learned at your previous company. Using your words, it was a faff. So I'm keen to understand what was a faff and how did you try and get that right with some of the other guys when building the business and the developer experience. But firstly, problem that you're trying to solve. Talk to us a little bit about that.
There's a huge amount of information that's really useful about the way any business operates, and their operational information is incredibly useful. And often that operational information gets spat out into a ledger, right? So the accounting information often is a ledger is a good history of the kind of activity in a business. And that can be used to report, right? To build kind of, balance sheets and profit and losses and things like that, those kind of accounting reports. And people manage that information in all sorts of different ways. So all sorts of different bits of software, essentially. And it's really useful to help, price in terms of lenders. There are business apps type settings where somebody wants to automate some business management process, they need to interact with that information. And there's no standardized model for doing an accounting other than a ledger, right? And I think a lot of people understand double entry bookkeeping, but unfortunately the way that information is surfaced through APIs and from, and even when there's not an API, some old school desktop app, that's not particularly standardized. And so allowing people to kind of get access to that information, standardize the authorization process. And that's the first part of what Codat does. So makes getting that authorized access to the information really, really easy with some UI tools as well as some APIs. And then standardizing that business management information. And we started with accounting data because that was super valuable to a lot of the people that we knew needed it, lenders and other financial services. But also there's like, point of sale information, from payment systems. There's, payroll information, HR information. All that stuff can be really useful for either someone in the financial service that's maybe trying to price something better for you and understand the risk of doing business with you, as well as something that's much more operational, like expense management or something like that, that is kind of just admin that you might find a company does really well, that you want to use their expense management solution, but you really want your accountant to be happy about you using that system. And so we use the standardization of the data as an intermediary for either being able to read information out of that third party or being able to write information back into that third party. And then on top of that model, we have a few products that standardize being able to move information. And it's a bit different than an API gateway, those kind of MuleSoft type tools that do aggregation of APIs and authorization, because we think Codat, we've got a big SME knowledge base about the domains of the information. We're not looking at any old information. We're specifically looking at business management information, so accounting and payments and point of sale and this sort of information. And we think we can better standardize and map that to use it as an intermediary. And so, it's kind of like a little bit of value add for being able to plug that data in and out of various places you want to plug it in and out of.
Cool. I want to touch on a couple of points. We can touch on them later. There's a couple of high profile integrations that you've gone through, but I think that's a really good overview of how you might plug into a business, the business offering essentially that you guys and girls give. So that's some good context. Let's roll back just a little bit to some of the faff and some of the learnings, because obviously we want to talk about the engineering stuff. So I don't like to focus on failures, but what did you maybe learn at your previous company that you took into your engineering here when you were thinking about building largely, seemingly, a very back-end and API-focused product, do you think?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we learned, especially about, the way that some of the systems we'd interacted with previously had worked, was that the value of really understanding failure. And I know you've asked me, what did you do? What did you learn from failure? And I guess that even as a technical answer, I think understanding exactly where you're failing and why you're failing. I think when you're doing a job like aggregation and standardization, you need to be really, really, really defensive in a way that you really know that if you think you know the intent of the piece of information you're receiving, that you're then saying you can map into some standard form, that you really understand the edge cases and the intent of that information you're bringing in. And if you're even a little bit unsure, that you stop and you try and find every way to be able to communicate exactly how. And so, I think using those systems and building the thing before, there was a lot of occasions where something is going through some engine to translate data, and we're an intermediary, right? We're not the end user, and we're not necessarily the consumer of it either, and we don't necessarily have a direct relationship with the end user. So being able to stop and quiz them about, or it's not really possible. So you kind of really need to know what's going on. I think that understanding, failing fast and understanding why you're failing, always expecting failure, were things that we took of being really useful. I think it's one of the things that makes Codat quite a useful product, is that we're pretty open about things. We think our speed to be able to fix and correct and apply some knowledge to move forward is really, really good. But yeah, we're not going to make a best guess or make an assumption. And I think that's really important in these sorts of things. And we definitely learned that moving into Codat, that it was going to be really valuable to build trust, because we were, like I said, 4 guys in a printer, right? Who's going to buy a product from us that's doing something that's quite serious, this standardization piece. I think the other thing was moving slow in terms of, building up the body of knowledge in the domain. We're moving really fast in terms of implementation, but each piece that we added, we were like, let's try and limit the scope as much as possible. Let's really target what sort of information we want to be interacting with from these third parties, and really understand that we know what we're doing with our own model which is, this kind of
Yeah.
that standardized model before we add more, right? Because it'd be quite tempting to say, okay, let's spend a year creating an Excel schema, right? Which is business management information. And it's a big, enormous beast. The idea that, lots of people around the world have tried to standardize things like that and they've flopped. So why on earth would we be any better than any standard organization anywhere else in the world? So yeah, I think that was a really sensible track.
Yeah, that sounds sensible, and I think you hit quite a good nail on the head there with moving slow, but having the ability to move fast with knowing what you're confident with. I see a lot of stories of companies just moving at 150 miles an hour. Not necessarily they go off the face of the earth, but they miss their product point at times, and they miss their focus. So I think it's nice to take that reflection and think, what we're really good at and what do we need to move slow on because we're acquiring that knowledge. So I think that's quite a nice balance as well, because it's easy to get some funding, get a runway, blast it, be a hyper growth company, and then sort of look at 2 years and think, what's just happened?
Yeah, and stumble a bit. And I think Codat was never in a position where we thought, we want to, I think we always, early doors, the joke in the company was we want to try a business model, which is to build a product and sell it for revenue, which seemed to be alien in tech and in some regard. That's a bit glib, I guess. But so, we wanted to build a product really early that we thought would add value and we could sell, and then iterate on, adding little bits of small scope that we really understood, but doing that fairly rapidly, rather than sitting in dark mode for a year or two, maybe missing the mark in some places. And it really helped, partly because, we didn't really understand the weird and wonderful ways in which people do business management and handle their information in these services until we started seeing real data in production, right? And it really tells you why it's such a hard problem, because people, the first thing people do when they buy a piece of software to do some administration tasks, they don't read the manual, right? Nobody sits down and read the docs about how you're supposed to use it. So they use it in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. And we saw all sorts of weird and wonderful data. And on top of that, these vendors aren't fallible. They're software written by humans, and there's bugs and there's outages and there's all sorts of things in their own systems, right, that they're trying to cover themselves for. And so the number of times that we came across things that were like, oh, actually, I think we can fix this issue in the data that, otherwise someone's going to stumble across themselves, when they're trying to integrate. So that kind of moving fast, but moving in really small little chunks, and making sure we're getting that product in the hands of clients as early as possible. Every little chunk delivers value to someone.
You've touched on quite a couple of interesting things that I can imagine, obviously don't have first-hand experience, but can be quite tough for you. That lack of customer interaction, how people are using business software, and you're working off the basis, like you just said, of some of the data points that you're getting from people. So not trying to work on assumptions. How tough can it be to understand what do our customers want if you don't always have that direct interaction with them, and you're feeding off some of that data that they give you? So how tough can that be to connect the dots for a startup? Sorry to put you on the spot there a little bit.
That's fine. And I think I've mentioned a couple of times that kind of having trust in how reliable and robust and the SME for that what you're doing in the area that you're doing it means that I think our clients and our clients early, we had a good rapport, we had a good relationship. They trusted us a level that when we came across those issues, we were open, transparent. And I think transparency is, like I said, about failing fast and know why you're failing, being honest about it. I think being really transparent means, and I made some notes about this because we're going to talk about some of the partnerships later. And I think we thought very early on that basically every client that we have and, every integration, every service that we pull data from, we think of them sort of more as a partner. And I know that sounds like nonsense gumph, but, it's much more about us working together to find out a solution than us kind of at arm's length putting out a product that it's like, and it's yours to administer and it's yours to work, right? So everything we came across, we were hand in glove with both our clients, and it meant that early on, the people were pretty keen to be like, actually, no, our user sees the value in our product, we see the value in yours, so let's all just sit down and work out what needs to be done here. And we've tried to carry that on. Obviously, it gets harder and harder as you scale more and more to have to be close to everyone. But it's, I think, starting early on from that kind of open, transparent, honesty kind of place. Yeah, I think you build the trust that means that when it comes to it, we get access to who we need to talk to be able to sort those sorts of things out. It's not always easy, but more often than not, you can get on a phone with somebody. They want to see it work.
Yeah. I love that. I think everyone listening can probably feel some of the pain points around, you do have to work on the basis of no assumptions, over communicate, really build partnerships with people. Otherwise, in whatever you're doing, you're not going to build something that is customer centric in the end. No matter how much, going back to that assumption point, no matter how much you think it is right for someone, sometimes it never always is. I'm like an optimist, pessimist, as in I am quite pessimistic and think, okay, that's probably not good enough. We probably need to do this. But I think until you actually ask really direct questions and build that relationship, that's when you actually start building something better. Going off on a slight tangent here.
No, it's it's true. Yes, stuff.
You talk about 4 guys printer, and that's grown from 4 guys in a printer to 10 guys and girls in a printer to 100 people. There's been funding rounds in there.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that journey. Try and sum that journey up, or that madness up. Not necessarily as succinctly as possible, but try and sum it up. What's that been like?
It's been really fun. I mean, I can't deny it's been great. I mean, I love my job, and I'm really, really excited by the company that I work for. So it's been fun. I mean, the things that have been challenging, I think, oftentimes are not necessarily the things you foresee, and a lot of the time it's because you're making decisions early on. You've got to balance against a long bet versus, your hand to mouth. And like I said, we weren't a company that was going to sit in dark mode for a number of years, feeding off funding. We wanted to be out selling the product. And we were, I say 4 guys and a printer. We were 5 guys. A commercial director joined very, very soon after I joined, and had been kind of, involved with Codat for a while there. And that was, that was super important. And, so it's always in retrospect, right, that you feel like the things that were hard could have been easier on yourself. And, I think some of the things that we really thought were going to be hard were hiring. I think we really thought that, hiring and culture was going to be incredibly hard. But maybe some of the things that we learned from previous companies and from mentors, the kind of other side of that, which are the other technical decisions we made early on. One of them was that we didn't really want to be writing any line of code. And at the time, Pete, our CEO, he used to be a developer, and he's, quite an accomplished C# dev, although he'd deny it now. Him, awesome. Dave, our CTO, and myself were kind of, nose to the keyboard in those early months. And, we wanted to be sure that anything that we put into paper for was a product we could sell, right? Because if you're spending time doing something, you want to know it's going to materialize as revenue somehow. And so we made a lot of decisions in those kind of, are we going to use something off the shelf? What tools are we going to use? How much time do we think we should spend learning before we start building? And we used really, really boring tech. And we used boring tech that we had used in the past, and that we knew that were, used by a lot of other industries that have been around for a while, right? We were like, we like C#, we like .NET. Okay, if we're all in on that, right? Everything is the Microsoft stack then, right? We're going to go into Azure. We're going to use their Azure DevOps rather than Jira, right? And everything is going to be point and click, one click to get from code to deployed into the cloud. Because anything on that journey that we have to write code on the journey to get product in the hands of our client is not something that's saleable. Like we can't sell our CI/CD pipeline, and we knew we needed one.
Okay.
So anything we can get off the shelf to mean that the only code we're writing is code that's going to do something for a client that we can sell. And that was a good decision. I think one of the things that we then got caught out by was, as the thing expanded, there becomes a cutoff point where, in terms of value, slowing down value, getting that pipeline to be as smooth as it possibly can. Most developers come in and that needs to be code. I think infrastructure as code, we were too late to. We made a decision about when to come to it, and we're really only getting to it now very seriously, which, and now it's a much bigger project than I think it would have been if we'd spent some time learning. But, you kind of make those bets, and it's only in retrospect, right? Maybe the 2 weeks that we spent working out how to deploy, using an infrastructure as code tool early on would have been 2 weeks that would have missed out on a deal, right? It's so hard to know. But yeah, that was true. That we probably could have made a better decision there. That's now, tough. Documenting as well.
So did what? So did more hires come into the business and say, there are a couple of gaps, we think infrastructure as code could be leveraged here, and these are the reasons why, for everyone to take that decision? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I guess this started with me talking about hiring and why choosing boring tech is useful. And so having that platform meant we were hiring, we weren't looking for something esoteric. We also were our hiring process is geared around what's the actual job people are going to do. I think a lot of companies hire for a culture fit and also a technical level, which is well beyond the job that they're actually going to be asked to do, right? I've been to interviews at places, and I've heard reports of people being interviewed. They're like, here's some really esoteric computer science problem that we need to, here's some graph theory thing. You need to write some code to do some recursive graph thing. And then they get to their job and they're writing CRUD apps. It's like, here's a bit of JavaScript on the front end and here's a bit of data access on the back end. And so I think we always wanted to make sure that our hiring process reflected the job that people are probably going to be, actually going to have to do. And I think it meant that we hired and selected people who were great at the job. And then the other things that we were looking for in that individual, came and gave us a
big... came with that?
Yeah, so if we're selecting for some subset, it didn't matter if someone had a whole bunch of extra other skills. They could bring that into the table to find usage and apply them. And so we had people that came in that had used Terraform before and were like, hey, this is going to be really useful. Why aren't we doing something similar in Azure? Fair thing to say.
You probably don't think that. Well, I think you do think it's a smart decision going with what you know, but there are so many instances where companies go with what I don't think some of the people feel comfortable doing, and they hire against probably what that person would or could be doing in that role. It seems simplified, or it seems just you've simplified everything, and that's what's been a success. And I was going to say culture kind of comes with that, because there isn't this ego expectancies that are really out of sync, that I think we're all human, right? We all have feelings, contribute to some of that, and everyone is kind of on the same page from the starting point. That's just how it feels. I don't know.
Yeah. We talk about sort of that transparent relationship, honest relationship we want to have with clients and with our integration, the people we integrate with and the partners there. And I think that translates internally as well, right? I think there's in being able to move quickly, you need people to be making decisions as close to the point of the problem as possible, right? Which means that the first person who comes across that problem needs to feel that they can either be empowered to make a decision to get past it, or they know where to go to get the data, and they can trust that they can say, hey, I don't know how to solve this problem. I can ask around to gather the information to solve that problem. And so, early on as well, that culture thing, really what we're looking for is people who are willing to collaborate, honest about the things that they're good at,
Okay.
and honest about the things that they're not good at, because it's much easier to balance a team and be able to solve problems when you know, hey, there's a thing here that there's an aspect of that problem this individual is probably going to be really good at. But there's part of that problem is maybe they need to pair with somebody. Maybe they need to work with another stakeholder in the business to work out that problem. And it meant that hopefully as much as possible, whoever confronted something was usually empowered enough to make a decision to move past it. And I think that's really important. I think maybe in our hiring, you don't say simplicity, but I think we try and explicitly pick for that. Like you say, no ego and politics. I mean, that's damaging, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Before we talk a little bit about some of the engineering challenges, I'm keen to uncover that. There's no doubt integration, high volumes of data, other things. What else do you think represents Codat's engineering ethos quite well? Low ego, trust, transparency. What do you think resembles what you might find together, hashing out some architecture or other things? What do you think might resemble being in that room if I was to stand in there from an outsider?
So there's a few, I guess, sort of institutions and organizations that I think, a few of us have respect for. And so, I'll use an example. So the IETF, right, which is kind of an organization of people that forward specs for the internet, right? They have this concept of RFCs, right? So where somebody puts out either a suggestion for a revision to something that's maybe a specification or an implementation specific for something. And we use that model a lot internally, and especially in engineering, for working out how to solve problems. So any engineer, might be a junior engineer, has come across a problem, they can publish an RFC internally, which can then be put up for peer review. And again, that's that kind of trust and openness thing. We're a big fan of saying that comment isn't criticism and correction isn't criticism, right? So we tend to get a good collaborative kind of atmosphere on hashing out, okay, here's what we think we want to do, get people to put their opinions in. And then off the back of that, it's up to the individual proposer really to say, hey, I think we've come to a better decision or come to a better idea. Let's run with that. And then we use ADR, which is architectural decision record, which is like this lightweight thing that means when people make a decision, maybe it's come off the back of an RFC or something like that, they can document it, which I think is really important with decision making and something we definitely didn't do enough of early doors. Maybe it goes through another round of collaboration, but the point is that it's the person who's come across the problem, who wants to find the solution, that gets to make the final decision and has the final say. And that might be a junior developer that wants to make a decision about how, hey, we're using a certain set of React components. Should we have a standardized way of doing it? Or we're writing a bit of code here in the back end to map this thing. It'd be really nice to have this piece of infrastructure that would help us. Right the way up to maybe a principal engineer who's saying, I really think that the way we handle errors in RPC calls into service communication, we need to change our global standard for error codes across the system. And equally, we get people's in a center of practice. So commenting and reviewing and revising. And then when we want to get that work, we also have the similar sort of relationship with the other departments in the business, whether that's product and the others. So getting that prioritized in our backlog is, can we kind of sit around a table equally to be like, hey, we've got technical things we want to do. They're always rooted in client value. And I think that's also really, really important. I think that's something you would probably notice a lot, as an outsider in a room at Codat, that from engineers to support, solutions architects, product, we're always talking about, okay, the thing that guides us in the room, the thing that makes us all bound here is the fact that Codat is selling product to clients, and we need to be selling a product that's effective and helpful to those clients. So whatever we're talking about, what's the client value? And that kind of helps detach it from any sense of personal value, which is fine. I mean, people can have passion projects, but it comes down to that. If we rewrite the platform in Golang, maybe that would be interesting, but honestly, what are our clients getting out of it? And maybe something, maybe nothing. And that keeps us grounded, I think, that sort of client focus, user focus.
I like that mindset. I think it's really easy to overcomplicate something. By the way, I'm probably not a fair person to judge, by the way, but I think it's really easy to overcomplicate something, and being product or customer first is in actually cool. There's some great shiny things that are happening here, but someone's paying for this, so let's get something of value in their hands. I like that. Talk to us a little bit about some of the developer experience that you'll find using Codat. I think that's quite important for you, and then we can roll back and go to some of the engineering challenges and, like I said earlier on, some of that integration. But I think it'll be useful to understand that Codat journey, as in that developer experience part. Can we understand that a little bit more, and what's that like?
Yeah. So, I mean, a bit of a journey. I guess when we first started out, there was a bit of a mission statement internally that we thought it should be possible to, reading the docs on your own, get up and running with a proof of concept with Codat's API in a day.
Yeah.
You know, the volume of code that needs to be written to be able to do that should constitute the fact that, and the concept that you need to think about and deal with should be simple enough and obvious enough to someone who's looking at this domain to be able to get up and running in a day. And I think we've tried really hard and to retain that. Early on, we used to do a lot of, basically every client that signed got a dev day, where they could sit down with, you know, quite often Pete and Dave, right, CEO, CTO, and myself as well at times, and you know, get a full day's worth of time for us to really understand and watch and pair with them to be like, what are the pain points? You know, if you're people using certain libraries or certain languages, are there certain things that make this more difficult? And that did change the way we thought about how we would design the API. And I think, you know, a lot of the time in organizations, you know, you have a designer who's a UI UX expert, you know, who are really great at storyboarding and creating beautiful design systems and things like that. But as the equivalent for an API design, it's tough. There's developers that will be like, I'd never write a line of front end in my life, but you know, I have to write all of these libraries and systems and APIs that other developers have to interact with, and that is a form of design, and there's an aesthetic there as well. And you know, we wanted to make sure that there was the same things that you think about in UI design, you know, balance and consistency and rule of least astonishment and all of that kind of stuff carried over into the way we design the API. And I think it's been tough, and there have been times where it's been a bit fragmented, and our API has been not as clear as we want it to be. And I think it's we have this focus that means that there's always this phase of correction, right, where we think, hey, we're adding a feature, I feel like it's making something, you know, and when we think of it in the whole, it's making it feel inconsistent. So, you know, how do we then take a step back and look at the whole design of this thing to say, where do we want to be moving to that makes it feel like Codat again, and try and follow through on that statement of kind of, you know, should only take a day, and a lot of that is about, you know, consistency of design and stuff like that. Which has been hard. The getting the time as well. You know, I think in terms of our balance between, you know, we've only just started doing really a self-serve offering, because I think, you know, we were doing that kind of hand in glove with clients. We wanted to be embedded in that onboarding process.
Not scalable though, is it?
So yeah, exactly. It's not scalable, and so you got to find
it's not scalable for your CEO to be there.
No, for sure. And, you know, finding the cutoff point, you know, when do you start saying, okay, we've learned enough? Where are the points that we need to still have close touch? How do we work out getting a feedback channel? You know, we've just gone through that growing pain, and we're starting to go into, you know, having a better self-serve offering, which will scale much better, having documentation that we think really reflects our ethos much better than, you know, maybe it had done at times when that culture and that ethos was more tribal, right? Which means you need to sit down and have a campfire story to learn it, rather than have something that's like an edict or a freeze on the wall, which happens when you become a bit more of a civilization.
And I'm right in saying it's definitely worth investing in,
Yeah.
just for use and happiness of customers and ease of integration. I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, but it's about continually getting that consistency and investing in it, right?
Yeah. And thinking about an API like any other piece of design work, and really sitting with your clients and watching. This happens all the time, and people talk about it all the time, right? Sitting down and watching your clients use your product. But whether that's I think UX designers are very used to setting up that sort of process.
Okay.
Doing card sorts, doing dummy things with mock-ups and user groups and focus groups.
Yeah.
It's something that a lot of UX designers do a lot of. But something when it comes to API design and it's in a developer's hand, that's not a set of tools that they're used to. So you need to find a way for you to be able to really watch other engineers use your API, and you learn a huge amount from it, and we learn massive from it. A lot of people coming in from organizations where they're like, Java developers and things like that, an organization that have got like, well, actually, we've got this monolith of stuff that I have to think about whenever I write a line of code, and actually getting to the point at which I can write a line of code that makes a request to an API actually is not as simple as writing that line of code that lets you access an API. And the different tooling that people were using, it was really eye-opening, and it was really sensible to, and we learned
I can imagine. So you make an integration seamless. So can you help us understand some of the engineering challenges that you, the team, go through? Example, we've spoken offline, managing high volumes of data. Okay. What other engineering challenges, or that challenge in particular, do you think you face that are compelling about the environment that you're working in?
I think that the data thing is interesting, and this is probably true of a lot of those sorts of data platforms, is that people are more and more interested in real-time information, right? And that they want the information to be there as soon as they ask for it, but they're not going to be asking you all the time, which means you're going to have this kind of this asymmetry in your system. I think a lot of engineering or patterns and practices over the last few years have been geared around this kind of optimizing that kind of CRUD app. And maybe the canonical example is like a newspaper, right? So journalist writes article at newspaper, they write story gets written to database. Editor comes along, takes a read, puts some red pen in or makes some edit. There's an update operation, right? So you've got one write update operation, one update thing. Then they publish it on the website and 10 million people read it, right? So an awful lot of engineering is geared around that model, right? I take a picture once with Instagram and then all of my followers want to be able to see it the second that comes up. Whereas Codat has a sort of a problem with it's sort of reversed, right? Opposite side of things, where someone's only going to come and look at that photograph once, but when they look at it, they want to make sure that it's really up to date. So actually, we have tens of millions of write actions going on behind the scenes for every time somebody wants to come in and read data out of our cache. So the way that the system works is when we're pulling as information as real time as possible from the people that we integrate with, and we store it in a cache, we have a sensible query engine on the front of then, right? So it means that when then the availability for that information isn't at the behest of whatever third party it is, it also means that the ability to transform and manipulate and query that information isn't at the behest of the API that's on the other side. So we've got these kind of systems at whatever cadence you want to be able to update that data, kind of going out and trawling those third parties to get that information to be as real time as possible in this cache that people then query into. So one of the problems there, we've got some query engine sitting on front of a database that's incredibly write heavy, right? There's constantly churn in the information, and how do we make that information queryable and structured and written to in the quickest way possible, because speed is very important there. Then in terms of the standardization problem, there's huge amounts of data. It's quite lossy, right? We get huge amounts of data, and you have to chip away at the bits that you want to be able to map the intent. And so there's masses of volume there, and you need the way that we code those things, the kind of domain knowledge we need to understand use cases, to be explicit about when we're mapping intent, and to do it in a performant way, right? Those things where we're mapping that information, sometimes it's not a one-to-one, right? There's different pieces of information which need to be brought together to kind of give you one value somewhere. And so actually there's quite a lot of algorithmic complexity there. It seems like it might be mundane. It's like bit shoveling, right? I'm just taking this string from here goes there, but it's never that simple, right? And so there's doing that kind of thing in a technically performant way, but sympathetic to the domain, right? You need to know a little bit about what information you're handling and why. And that's, I think that's a really fascinating set of problems. And the general scale, like infrastructure and the terabytes of information that's just flying around, right? That's, as you mentioned, obviously a big part of what we do. And then, obviously the DX.
I was just about to, I can imagine that the DX is that's an interesting challenge. I think the interesting part, you touch on performance, and I can imagine we're going to talk about this integration with Plaid, however they shape it. I've heard two versions. I can imagine that the complexity grows with performance as the loads increase, and you talk about making your system more performant with algorithms and other things. I can imagine it's just this moving triangle constantly as the business scales. People still want to access data real time, and they want it at the same speed that they did a year ago. But that scale is continuously growing. So I can imagine that's a tough challenge to get right. As an outsider, getting that performance as performant and optimal as ever with that scale and load increasing.
Yeah, we talked about hiring and company culture, that kind of, the system, RFCs, ADRs, and people being empowered to make decisions, people being empowered to input new technical work, and that's an area where it's it's particularly important because we think engineers should be owner operators, so they're quite often the ones who are operating the systems. They're the ones looking at the monitoring, they're looking at the dashboards, they're looking at what's being spat out, and need to be feeding into where do we think our next bottleneck is that's going to slow this down in a way that's a client is going to notice, that any number of clients are going to notice. And rather than having some centralized point of architectural design around it, sometimes I might, on a particularly egotistical day, maybe I'll sit in a white tower and say, I think we should do X. But generally, it's coming up from the entire team, right? Which is, I think here there might be a bottleneck. Okay, well, where's that coming from? Maybe we can help coordinate or collaborate with another team. Is that bottleneck coming because of some dependency on some other system? And you're always thinking, okay,
nice.
Let's talk to sales. Let's talk to business, the business development guys. Let's talk about what markets we're attacking. What does the shape of the data in those markets make those bottlenecks look like? And, if we sell to this client or this client, what's their usage going to be like? What parts of the system do they really passionate about? Because what you want to know is, I want to be making sure that my scale problem in 6 months' time is solved now, right? Because the last thing you want to do is be tackling a scalability problem at the point at which you have it. Because usually what that means is your infrastructure is red lighting everywhere, and you've got an incident and an outage on your status page. And so, it's this kind of constantly, you need to be ahead of, okay, what do we think the problem is going to be in 9 months? And that's probably fine. I think maybe that's the other thing we talked about, simplicity. Doing things that don't scale is maybe okay, as long as you know where the bin fires are that are going to burn down the building in 6 months' time, and longer you're ahead of those. Because equally, you don't necessarily want to be thinking about, hey, we need to make this aspect of the system the most possibly performant and scalable thing in the entire world, if that's not going to be the bottleneck for the way that the system's going to be used, which is not always something you can easily predict. And we try the DX thing, right? That kind of make sure that there's only one sensible way to do any particular activity, and that means you have a little bit of an understanding of the impact in the system for any use case. But yeah, you've kind of got to be just in time and just ahead of that sort of thing to make sure you're applying value where it's going to be felt the most. And that takes collaboration, because you need the operators of the system to be telling you where those bottlenecks are going to be.
Yeah, I can imagine observability is quite a big thing then. Actually really seeing what's going on the ground or in your systems, as in, and probably looking at some of that growth over 3 months. But it's someone's job or everyone's job to think, okay, let's think and build for 10x, because we don't want to be here every quarter where we're doing more sales, but from a tech perspective, it's absolutely chaos because we're putting out fires every single day.
Yeah.
So I get that.
Yeah. I mean, it's software, so you're putting out fires every single day. That's
true.
But that's fine, right? The fires, a bin fire is okay, right? It's an office fire that's not okay.
Good. So plaid, how do you say it?
I mean, I say plaid, but that doesn't mean I'm right.
Cool.
I'm not sure.
let's go with plaid and talk to us about that integration. Talk to us about what that means to customers, what that means to you as a business. That's impressive, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, they've really shown the value of the model, right? I think in terms of, if you're looking at an organization, you're looking out at incumbents who have solved problems, you'd be like, was that a problem that needed solving? Well, they've done it really well, and evidently it definitely was. The great company with great products. I think they had a sort of similar ethos about developer experience and transparency and all that kind of good stuff. And so a really great product. And obviously we started with accounting information. And accounting information, the sort of business management information, depending on your cultural perspective, may or may not be super reliable. Like how many times do people fiddle the books? Well, people fiddle the books all the time, and maybe the people that fiddle the books are the ones that are out on the market looking for finance, right? Who might be talking to some lender and saying, "Hey, please look at my balance sheet and please give me whatever finance I need to get through whatever I'm doing," right? And so understanding how reliable accounting information is incredibly important to a lot of people who want to be able to use the information, the level of abstraction that it is, right? So I want to know what people are invoicing, and I want to know who they're invoicing. I want to know about debtor concentration and all these kind of wonderful things you can calculate from that sort of information. But I want to know that I can really trust it.
Yeah.
The great thing about your bank statement is it's very hard to cook the books on a bank statement, right? A bank statement tends to be something that holds a certain trust, I guess, in terms of that information. And so having that information alongside each other, right? Your kind of your bank statement that proves the activity that's happening in the business is really important to the people who want to consume this information. And so, having them alongside each other it opens up a huge number of use cases for both products, right? People who are like, what I really want to do is I want to use business management information, but I don't necessarily trust it. I can use bank information to verify it. I think it's a really powerful kind of combination for people who want to do that sort of thing. And I think that kind of this idea, I guess we mentioned partners a lot. It's really important, this openness of this kind of open data principles, right? Having good kind of authorized access to information that you can leverage as a user. I don't mean Codat as a company or Plaid or Plaid as a company. I mean you as a user, who as a business owner or an accounts individual at an organization, you really want to be able to leverage your information in a way that allows you to make choices about products that you want to interact with, whether that's something like expense management or something like some financial product from someone, better overdraft or a business loan. And also that in that world, you want to pick the best product for the job, right? So if you're like, I want to bank with this neobank and I want to get my this fintech. I want to do invoice financing with this fintech or whatever. And the expectation is these days, right, that you guys should be talking to each other, right? Why do I have to do a whole bunch of manual processes to, as long as I'm being asked and you guys are being honest about the fact that I'm giving you my information to be able to act on, that absolutely needs to be facilitated. And so, more and more, I think this kind of model, I think is, really, really important.
I love it. We've discussed simplified architecture, engineering ethos, and I guess how you talk about architecture, documentation, team decisions. We've spoken about some interesting things on performance, developer experience, and thinking about scale. Is there anything that you're quite keen to share with people who are no doubt listening, thinking they look like an interesting business to go and talk to / work for? Is there anything else that you want to share with anyone that represents you guys and girls?
That's a good question. I guess I think in terms of getting a picture for, how Codat solves problems and what, what maybe there would be an expectation from any individual who joined the organization, right? So that kind of, I think we've kind of, we've probably gone over it fairly well, and that kind of, honesty and trust and collaborative. I think that those are probably the most important things to us. And there's a big expectation of individuals that come into the business. That trust comes with responsibility, of course, but I think that's if you like working in an environment that's kind of open, and that you are expected to make decisions when you're confronted with them, and if you don't know how to make a decision, that you're open and fine with going to look for help. That doesn't suit everybody, I think that, but I think it's sort of essential at Codat, I think.
Okay. Are you looking for people right now? If so, who are the sorts of people that you're looking for? Go for it.
Yeah. Who are we looking for? Who are we not looking for? I think we're,
okay.
If you think of a role in a tech business, we've probably got an opening for it. In engineering, we're always on the lookout for C# devs with kind of patterns and practices, who think about testing first and all that kind of good stuff. Passionate about continuous integration, continuous delivery, and kind of microservice type architectures, I guess.
Yeah.
We're always on the lookout for good C# devs. We're also looking for kind of React. I think in terms of people being full stack, I think we like specialists. I think partly going back to that collaboration point, if you're being super collaborative, then having specialists can be quite useful, right? Because people tend to pair and things like that, and you get the best of each other's skills. So this sort of full stack's a thing, but I think our C# is pretty middleware and back end, and our front end is kind of all React. We're doing as much as we do microservices in back end, we kind of do micro-frontends as well. So to owner-operated teams who operate some back-end service or function usually own and are moving towards owning the front-end piece for that as well. So that's cool if you come from an organization, and I think that's a fairly new world for front-end, that kind of microservices architecture for front-end, but we're getting a lot of good stuff out of it. QA, we're always looking for good QAs. Assets, really. I think generally our QA is kind of embedded in engineering teams. They're like a quality specialist.
Nice.
They're not expected to write all the automation, right? Engineers should be writing tests, but we really like QAs that are kind of aesthets, I guess, happy writing automation. And then at the front of the business, right, we're looking for solutions architects, account executives, and ops people, and a lot of different roles. We've got an office in New York as well. That we opened last year. That's slowly growing. We're building a sales team there principally, but also a solutions architecture team and probably a support team at some point. So we have kind of follow the sun type support. And so, I don't know if you've got international listeners, but there's that office is opening up, and we're looking for people to kind of start fleshing out that team.
Hope so. Hope we've got some people over there. If everyone listening to summarize a little bit about what we discussed, with some of the engineering challenges, you should come and think about talking to Jason, talking to Codat. If you're in the world of .NET, C#, modern engineering practices and principles, and following some nice ways of doing things, working for a business that actually wants to deliver a product that, of course, generates revenue, but is moving at some pretty good pace, tune in. There's some links below where you can pester Jason. Please pester him. Reach out to any of the links that are on there, and go and speak to some of the guys and girls. And Jace, big thank you to you. And it's been awesome to have you here. And good luck with everything that's going on at Codat.
Cheers, man. Yeah, thanks, Elliot. Good chat. You asked some cunning and difficult questions. Thanks, man.
Sorry. I honestly don't mean to do that, but thank you.
No, for everyone else, wants to read a script, right? That's boring.
Yeah, exactly. For everyone else, please share, show your friends, come and share your stories. A big thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
See ya.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found at Engineers.io. It's no_. We've also got a website, which is Engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.